Good morning. Baby, it's cold outside, right? Man. Some of you may have seen this movie. It's called Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe, directed by Ron Howard, one of my favorite movies. So if you've never seen it, it's worth checking out, Cinderella Man. It's about a guy named Jimmy Braddock, who was a boxer during the time of the Great Depression. And Jimmy Braddock was an amazing guy. They call him Cinderella Man because he went from getting basically government assistance with being evicted to winning the World Heavyweight Championship boxing title after he beat Max Baer, all within 1 year. And after he got his winnings, he took the money and went back to the government and paid them back. Cinderella Man. Some of you may have seen the movie Rudy. Anybody ever seen Rudy? Good guy flick, right? Love that movie. I remember going to see Rudy in 1993 when that came out. Tells the story of a guy named Rudy Rudiker who got into Notre Dame by the skin of his teeth, played football for Notre Dame by the skin of his teeth. Great. Anybody ever heard of Vince Lombardi? I'm guessing you have. First 2 Super Bowls for the Green Bay Packers. Vince Lombardi went every day. Died in his mid-50s. He was buried at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan. Simone Biles, the most decorated gymnast of all time. Over 30 medals to her name. All of these people, they're all Catholic. They were and are Catholic. And one of the things that I appreciate about Jimmy Braddock, Vince Lombardi, Rudy Rudiker, and Simone Biles is not just that they're Catholic, it's that they were actually humble. Confident, yes. Competitive, you better believe it. But humble. There's a big difference, in my humble opinion, between being confident, which is grounded in humility, and being egotistical and arrogant. There's 2 very, very different things. Very different things. What's the difference, Father? The difference is this. Somebody that has a big ego is threatened by the people. Anybody that knows Simone Biles will say right off the bat that she can relate to anybody. There's no ego with her. Gotta love that, man. We need more of that in the world. Maybe just something to walk away with this morning. Here's the truth. You and I are no better and no worse than anyone else in the world. We are no better and no worse than anyone else in the world. And this is what always happens, isn't it, when we compare ourselves with other people. We have a big ego or deflated self-esteem. Or as St. Paul says in Galatians, he says, right, there's no Jew or Greek among you. There's no slave or freeman. There's no male or female. We're all equal. We're all equal in the sight of God. In fact, let's be honest. Many of the people that are maybe looked down upon in this world will probably have a much higher place in heaven than some of us, than me. The last will be first, and the first will be last. Be careful who you step on to get ahead. Humility leads to real authenticated confidence, that we're not threatened by other people, yeah? So, bear with me for a second, if you don't mind. I want to tell you a story. On Christmas night, there's this great scene, isn't it? Jesus is sleeping. Mary and Joseph finally get Jesus to sleep, right? And they're in the manger, and it's so cold they're going to sleep, and they can see their breath as they're about to go to sleep. And they snuggle in on the hay for a nice sleep. And all of a sudden, right when they start sleeping, the angel appears to Joseph, as we hear in the Gospel of Matthew. And the angel says to Joseph, "Rise, take the child and his mother and go to Egypt, because Herod is trying to kill the baby." And, okay. So he goes to Mary, "Honey, we got to get up. We got to go to Egypt." And Mary's like, "Now?" She didn't say that, right? I mean, that's what I would have said. Now? Do you know that that road from Bethlehem to Egypt was very, very dangerous? In fact, you may have heard me say in the Greek Orthodox Church, they have a belief that Mary and Joseph, as they were going down that road to Egypt, there were two men that tried to rob them. And 33 years later, those same two thieves were the ones that died next to Jesus, Gesmus and Dismas, one of whom became a saint, Saint Dismas. So imagine you're walking through the worst neighborhood in Memphis with a newborn and you're flat broke. Every December 28th in the Catholic Church, we have what we call the Feast of the Holy Innocents. If you're wondering, who's the Holy Innocents? That's the thousands and thousands of children that King Herod killed looking for Jesus. I mean, like, what? How despicable of a human being do you have to be to kill thousands of children? It's pretty low, man. And this is why I'm telling you this story. Where are you going with this, Father? This is why I'm telling you. We can learn a lesson from King Herod. Here's the lesson. People with a big ego are always threatened by other people. They're always threatened. If Herod had confidence that was grounded in humility, he would have been, "This is great. This is awesome. We've got a newborn. Here, let's have a party. Let's have a fiesta for him." But there people with a big ego are always threatened that somebody else is going to take their little fiefdom. So when we sense this in ourselves, this envy, this jealousy, we need to step back and say, "No, it's not them. It's yours truly. You need to work on yourself." It's funny, last Sunday I had the Spanish Mass, and at 7 p.m. on Sunday, and at Mass I was standing back here behind the altar, and I go to open the tabernacle, and the tabernacle won't open. And so everybody was sitting there like, "Chop, chop, Father. Let's go." Right? So I go to open, won't open, try to open, it won't open. Then the lector, the altar servers come over, they try to help me. It won't open. And I'm like, "Jesus, quit being an introvert. Let's go. Come on." So we had some really strong words, me and Jesus, right? I'm sitting there talking to him, doing this. So after Mass, I'm standing out here, and people are leaving, and I'm saying goodbye. And this woman comes up to me. She said, "Father, I was just so beautiful. You were up there having this beautiful conversation with Jesus. You're so holy." And I said, "Yeah, it's probably good my microphone was not on, you know." But point being, if Father Ben was more humble, I wouldn't be arguing with Jesus during Mass, okay? Learn a lesson from me, all right? This is for all of us, isn't it? I mean, imagine, for instance, you're in the medical field, and you're in a hospital bed, and somebody has no bedside manner. Imagine you go to a mechanic, and you're telling the mechanic the problem, and they look down their nose and say, "What do you know?" Imagine you go to a restaurant, and your waiter or waitress looks down at their nose on you because you want white wine with red meat or red wine with chicken and fish. Or let's turn the tables. You go to a restaurant and you look at your waiter like peon. Or let's imagine you're a Catholic priest and you say, "I don't go to the hospitals. That's below." We've had a few of those over the years. The poison of ego can infect any of us. Let's imagine tonight you're at a Christmas party and you're talking to somebody and you're like, can you believe that she wore that? Look at her hair. You see how subtle this is? They say in Spanish, there's un poco veneno en tu café. A little bit of poison in your coffee every day. We begin to drink the Kool-Aid, man. We can all fall into Herod syndrome if we're not careful. But we are no better and no worse than anyone else. God will judge all of us the same. So I'll close with this. It's hard for many of us to imagine, but in the 1930s, the 1940s, and the 1950s in this country, did you know that 500,000 people, roughly, were dying every year from polio? 500,000 people, okay? Most of whom were children. And the ones that were not dying were often crippled by polio. And by the way, that also includes our president at the time, FDR. So we were searching frantically for a polio vaccine. And then in 1947, Dr. Jonas Salk spent the next 7 years working on a polio vaccine, working mostly alone. And then it was announced in April of 1955 that, well, he did it. Got a vaccine. As you can imagine, they held him up as a miracle worker. He was on Life magazine, Time magazine, met the president, all the news. And they asked him, they said, well, why don't you patent the vaccine? And his response was, he laughed and he said, can you patent the sun? As if to say, it's not mine to patent, it belongs to humanity. He never received one dime for his work. Never received the Nobel Peace Prize for his work. Had 3 sons who were doctors. And this is why I'm telling you this. At the time of Dr. Salk's life, he died in 1995. He was working on the AIDS virus when he died. At the time of his life, his whole life, he was hated by many in the medical and scientific community. Hated. Why? Why? How can you possibly hate this man who saved millions of people's lives? Well, in my opinion, you can sum it up in one word: envy. That should have been me on the cover of Time magazine and Life magazine. That should have been me. If people appreciated my greatness and everything I'm doing, do you see this? You see how subtle this thinking is. And if we are not careful, we can fall into Herod syndrome. Brothers and sisters, here's my point. You and I are no better and no worse than anyone else. We are loved intrinsically for who we are, where we are. And yet, God is asking us to go further. I believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty.